Welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, July 29th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the New York City mayoral race and Zohran Mamdani, who stands to be today as one of the most popular Democratic politicians within the city, on track for a likely solid victory this coming November as he faces up against three other contenders for this November general election. Mamdani, who recently won the New York City mayoral primary with a decisive and massive 12-point victory in a race where he was outspent 5-1, is now heading full force ahead into the 2025 general election, leading consistently in poll after poll. And it isn't just these data points that provide us the understanding that Mamdani is liked and well received. It's also the fact that on the basis of just simply, do you view these candidates favorably or unfavorably, Mamdani is the second most popular Democratic politician in the entire city of New York amongst Democratic primary voters, second only to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And so what that means is that going into the 2025 race, there's been a lot of conversation around who has endorsed Mamdani versus not. After Mamdani won the primary decisively, there was an expectation from many members of the mainstream part of the Democratic Party that they get out and endorse Mamdani. After all, he is the Democratic nominee for mayor in this city, and generally speaking, it is the party that pushes the narrative of vote blue no matter who. And so when it comes down to Mamdani, to see the lack and absence of major endorsements from people like Senator Chuck Schumer and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and Leader Hakeem Jeffries, a lot of these notable exclusions in the endorsement list are things that people recognize and notice and see as if maybe this means that Mamdani is vulnerable in some type of way. But I want to be here and say, very, very clearly that I don't expect Mamdani to lose this race whatsoever. And I don't think that the lack of endorsement really speaks to anything further than inter-party politics rather than a vulnerability in a general election. We've talked a bit about lackluster candidates in the past. We've seen times where national party figures won't endorse candidates who they know are going to lose the eventual general election. Mamdani is far from that. He will be the next mayor of New York City, and he is certainly a talented politician no matter how you cut it. Someone who goes from a position where you're down, at just 1% in polling in February and winning in June, certainly someone that deserves to be respected in terms of an electoral basis. And generally speaking, too, Democrats have yet to tap into key demographic groups that Mamdani turned out in a very clear way, in a way that was extremely decisive in the general election and in this regular election. Politico even has an article on it that they published just 2 days ago talking about South Asian voters and how they've often been overlooked by New York City Democrats that weren't, brought into this group of a quote-unquote likely voter screen or prioritize, communities that Democrats typically go to, and Mamdani did, and he turned them out to win. And so, again, we already know that Mamdani had a very strong victory, one that certainly deserves a lot to be analyzed and understood, and certainly serves to be as somewhat of an understanding of how Democrats can do well in certain regions of the country. Now, I'm not here to make the argument that Mamdani's policy platform points on the national level are something that the 2028 election must revolve around. What I do think, though, is the way that he came across as authentic, as meaningful, as caring about the cost of living, and as straightforward as the policy points were very, very influential and very impactful in this cycle. Now, the focus of this video is not an autopsy of Mamdani's victory. We've already done a lot of that, and I think that we've, can start talking about this general election. But what I'm more focused on is the way that New York City Democrats perceive Mamdani and what that means for his general election odds and why it's so important that even with this lack of endorsements, Mamdani actually outruns everyone else in the more, outside of New York City bubble is looking to see an endorsement for Mamdani. Now, for Mamdani's sake, obviously it would be nice to receive an endorsement from some bigger names in the mainstream Democratic Party. After winning the primary, this is the list of all the people who came out and said, okay, I support Mamdani post-primary, not pre-primary. We remember it was Bernie Sanders, AOC, Jamal Bowman, a number of people, actually a significant chunk of members of Congress and notable figures in the Democratic progressive space, but nobody on the establishment level. And so after he won the primary here in New York City, Elizabeth Warren came out in support, Pramila Jayapal, Jerry Nadler, a lot of people, Antonio Delgado, Lieutenant Governor of New York. So you do have some big names. But to the degree that you have some of the biggest names in New York politics, like Kathy Hochul, the incumbent governor, like Chuck Schumer, the incumbent Senate minority leader for the Democratic Party, like Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader for the Democrats in the House of Representatives, all come from the state of New York, and yet none of them have made a clear endorsement. And they haven't been avoiding the press. They haven't been hiding from the idea that they haven't made an endorsement. Hakeem Jeffries and his office told reporters that he met with Mamdani for upwards of an hour when he came to Washington, D.C. just a few days ago. And what the result of that was no endorsement. And it doesn't look like they're shying away from it. So there is certainly some level of benefit that if he gets those endorsements, maybe it will move some over disaffected Democrats from Cuomo's camp or Adams' camp and moves them back into the Democratic Party column. But now there's an interesting case to be made that maybe Mamdani doesn't need necessarily these endorsements, that his level of popularity has exceeded those who might endorse him in this general election, and that might be all that matters. A brand new poll that was released from Data for Progress did a huge dive into issues and into candidates and into people ranging not just on the Democratic side, but also people like Donald Trump, the Republican Party, members of the independent, who are registered independents, people like Cuomo and Adams, and they ask a lot of questions. And the ones that I think really stick out to me in looking just plainly at favorability rating, which is often a huge indicator of electoral success, especially in races like this. When it's a more nationalized race, not as much. But on a localized basis, name ID is a huge thing. In the city of New York, all of the candidates, besides maybe the Republican nominee, have near 100% name ID amongst those who are going to be voting this November. And it's a big question. How do voters view these candidates? And so they ask about people like Bernie Sanders, where you find that, there's going to be a significant amount of people, right? 79% of registered New York Democrats say, yeah, I have a favorable view of Bernie Sanders. AOC, 75%, right? So that number there, the overall net here for AOC, plus 60, plus 62. Brad Lander, plus 55. Mamdani, plus 42, 68%. Of Democrats view him favorably. Hakeem Jeffries, plus 27%. So a huge drop-off, right? So in the city of New York and in the state of New York, AOC comes in as the highest-ranking Democrat in the city. But then you have Mamdani, higher than Brad Lander, which overall, just in terms of numbers here, 68%, 75%. You find it here too. Hakeem Jeffries, 58%. Drops down tremendously. Plus 27 amongst your own base is not exactly where you want to be, and there are some reasons for that. And you'll find that as you dissect more of the polling. Kathy Hochul, right, 60 to 35. Plus 25 for Hochul, who is the incumbent governor, being outpaced not only by Mamdani, but also too, Brad Lander, certainly notable there that they cross-endorsed each other and stand above the fray and don't seem to be part of what is expected as this traditional Democratic establishment. I think that's something that we need to talk about too. Looking at Antonio Delgado, yes, he endorsed Mamdani, doesn't have high name ID, right? 63% of voters in the city that are in the Democratic Party say they haven't heard enough to say anything. So would put that in more as a wash, but for Kathy Hochul, huge chunk. Only 5% of people say they haven't heard enough. Hakeem Jeffries, even 11% say they haven't heard enough. Mamdani, more people say they haven't heard enough about him to make an opinion than Hochul, and still Mamdani is pulling out with higher favorability ratings at the overall net and in terms of overall raw percentage. In terms of Democrats in Congress, it's plus 17. Chuck Schumer is just plus 7. Kirsten Gillibrand is just plus 3. And Cuomo is down to negative 12. AIPAC is down to negative 35. Eric Adams is down to negative 62. Netanyahu's down to negative 64. Donald Trump is down to negative 86. So all of the people that they're polling and all of these questions that are being asked about how do you view these lists of candidates, you find that Mamdani is constantly outpacing. And looking at the list of candidates there, I mean, it is all of the Democrats that you are finding that won't endorse Mamdani that are still finding to be less popular than Mamdani in this city. And so thinking about an eventual general election, that's a big reason why I think a lot of people should be confident that Mamdani will likely win this race. Even with that massive maneuvering that Cuomo had put forth to the other candidates in the city, saying, if you're not polling ahead of me by September, you drop out of the race and endorse me. And even if that happens, Wick just did a recent poll on this where they asked voters head-to-head against Cuomo and Mamdani. Cuomo only takes an advantage of 1 percentage point. And I am not lost on how inaccurate the polls were in the past when they told me that Cuomo would win by a margin of at least 12, if not 20 to 25 points. And so Mamdani being at 39% on the overall split is actually a good place to be, considering that he's, one, likely going to outpace the polling, and two, you practically have two other Democrats running against you, splitting that vote. Cuomo is a registered, former registered Democrat, now an independent for this race, but we all know he's certainly not an independent. Eric Adams won that Democratic primary 4 years ago, so if there's any voters that were getting out there and saying, I'm backing Cuomo or Adams, chances are they're not Republicans, but chances are they're Democrats who might feel disaffected with the overall system, but not enough to sway it in favor of any candidate besides Mamdani. After all, he did win the majority of the vote and won in that first round, might I add, with the outright plurality against Cuomo when everyone said it would take multiple rounds to get through ranked choice voting. Even I said it because that's what the data was telling us. Well, now the data is not only telling us Mamdani is going to win, my expectation is he does better than this. I still think he mobilizes a huge chunk of the electorate that didn't vote in the primary, that will vote in the general election, and that didn't vote in previous general elections either. He turned out voters in the primary. I think he'll do it again in the general, and I think that will make a huge difference. And the question will be, do these mainstream Democrats that are pulling away from a full-fledged endorsement come to do it right at the final end to try to boost up their notability within the city and say that they backed the right racehorse? Or do they stay out of it entirely and Mamdani does well either way? Because that's really the only two different scenarios I see developing over the next few months. Then it might take a while for some of these Democratic endorsements to come in, but the record is clear. Mamdani was set and is set for victory without said endorsements. And the fact remains that he stands to be the second most popular New York politician in the entire city, outpacing the governor, representatives, even members of Congress all across the board. Mamdani polls higher. And that, I think, is something that needs to be really dissected in the future, which is that even with no clear and adamant party-level support, I mean, obviously he has the Democratic nomination, but to the degree that he's getting massive amounts of establishment folks behind him, just doesn't add up, right? Cuomo got the endorsement of former President Bill Clinton and still lost the primary. And I'm not here to argue that Mamdani needs the endorsements to win. Quite the opposite, actually. And I think that is what's going to be the story of this, that this Mamdani is very much pushing forward a people-powered movement. I think in a lot of these races, especially in the more partisan ones, endorsements make a huge difference. But in this general election, Mamdani has already won that Democratic nomination, and in my mind, has already won the mayoral race. And while there still will be a lot of fighting and a lot of, getting to the actual point of winning and solidifying that base by election day, based on the numbers we're seeing right now, based on the enthusiasm we're seeing right now, and based on where all these other candidates had done in the past, I am not confident any one of them, even head-to-head, will be doing enough to take down Mamdani, because that's the amount of support that he has. And you can see it clear as day, whether it's a polling or whether it's turnout or whether it's canvassing or whatever it is. Mamdani clearly has tapped into a huge disaffected portion of the voting population, turned them out to vote, and had them, usher him in this Democratic primary victory, and they will usher him. They will usher him in to City Hall come November of 2025. So keep a close eye on the New York City mayoral race. Definitely an interesting one. But as we start to see, Mamdani still remaining extremely popular within the city, he's on track for a very solid victory unless something dramatically changes. And chances are in this city, not much is going to budge. You have three stubborn other candidates who simply don't want to drop out and endorse each other. Well, Mamdani looks like he might win with a plurality, or chances are he might actually get a majority by the time it's November of 2025. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2025 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.